For years, Russia has accustomed its citizens to one promise: stability. In exchange for silence on political issues and no open opposition to the Kremlin, people could count on the state to guarantee them relative predictability. Prices in stores rose slowly, pensions and salaries were paid on time, fuel was available in every region, and basic services functioned. However, this unwritten contract is beginning to crack, and with it, the frustration of ordinary Russians is growing. Everyday problems, which until recently were glossed over or treated as exceptions, are becoming systemic and undermining the foundations of social trust. As a result, questions that no one dared to ask before are now being asked more and more loudly. Can this government still ensure stability in the country? The first sign of the crisis is fuel shortages. In many regions, gas stations have begun to ration sales, introducing limits of a dozen or so liters per driver. Queues, once associated with Soviet times, have returned to Russian roads. In some places, buses have stopped running because there is nothing to fuel them, and schools have suspended classes because children have no way of getting there. Local governments explain that these are temporary shortages, but residents know better. If an oil-producing country is running out of fuel, it means that something has really broken down in the mechanisms of the state. Every liter of gasoline becomes a symbol of the inefficiency of a system that, until recently, was supposed to be a rock of stability. On top of that, there are prices. In grocery stores, everything is going up in price, from bread and milk to basic hygiene products. Instead of mitigating the effects of inflation, the government is announcing tax increases which will only fuel frustration. There is talk of a VAT increase, and people are well aware that any such change will be passed on to consumers. The war budget has become a priority, and this means cuts and shifts in spending at the expense of ordinary families. Where the state once guaranteed social assistance, now the main priority is financing the army. For the average citizen, this translates into an increasingly thin wallet and the awareness that the authorities are sacrificing their daily economic security for political and military interests. Russian pensioners, for decades the most loyal social group supporting the current authorities, are also losing patience.
Chyba nie na lepsze, skoro jestem na emeryturze 20 lat i nadal pracuję, a praca jest ciężka.
The reform raising the retirement age was met with anger several years ago, but now there are new blows: delays in payments, declining purchasing power, and a growing sense of uncertainty. In a country that promised seniors respect and stability, the older generation is beginning to feel cheated.
A co ja? 15 000 dostaję, zapłacę za mieszkanie i koniec. I z głodu umieram.
Mówią, że niektórzy emeryci chodzą po śmietnikach.
No, u nas w naszym domu chodzą i zbierają szmaty, a może i jedzenie zbierają. Nie wiem.
Может быть, и еду собирают, не знаю.
А почему?
A dlaczego?
Bo nie ma z czego żyć.
Raportują przecież, życie się poprawia. Wszystko pięknie.
Poprawia się u bogaczy. Bogacze do kieszeni chowają, a emerytów krzywdzą.
Retirement, which was supposed to be a reward for years of work, is becoming a source of anxiety because it is unclear whether the money will arrive on time and whether it will be enough to cover basic medicines. This phenomenon is particularly dangerous for those in power because it was the older generations that formed the foundation of social support. If this foundation crumbles, it means that the entire edifice of the legitimacy of power is called into question.
Mówią, brak słów naprawdę, ale nic nie zrobisz.
Jak to nic nie zrobisz? To nasz kraj. Wydawałoby się, że jesteśmy gospodarzami kraju.
Aha, tak? My byliśmy podwładnymi. A kto nas, gospodarzy, słucha?
Слушать хотя.
No less important is the anger of the younger generation. Young people and those of working age are facing pressure to mobilize. Officially, these are referred to as voluntary contracts, but in practice they are increasingly becoming compulsory decisions made under threat of sanctions or transfer to the most dangerous units. The labor market is becoming hostage to military policy. The state is draining civilian personnel by offering high bonuses for signing military contracts, but in many cases it does not pay them on time or simply manipulates the terms. For young Russians, this means choosing between emigration, the risk of death on the front lines, or vegetating in an economy that is increasingly dying. This is giving rise to growing rebellion, often invisible on the streets but present in private conversations and online. The mothers and wives of those mobilized have become a symbol of this growing opposition, Their protests are small, often broken up by the police, but they carry enormous emotional weight. These are women who are no longer afraid of risk because they have loved ones to lose. Every picket line, every open letter, every online video becomes a pebble thrown into water, creating ever-widening ripples. When the apparatus of fear collides with the determination of mothers demanding the return of their sons home, the authorities begin to realize that their propaganda is not as effective as it used to be, and that stories of patriotism pale in comparison to the daily suffering of families. In this atmosphere, there is a growing sense that the old methods of governance are failing. The regime was based on three pillars: repression, propaganda, and handouts. The first of these, fear, still works, but not as it used to. People are still afraid of punishment for criticizing the army, and hundreds of people pay fines and end up in jail. However, the greater the problems of everyday life become, the less this fear paralyzes people. The second pillar, propaganda, is also losing its effectiveness. Television may repeat stories of successes on the front, but residents see queues for gasoline, high prices, and a lack of basic services. The third pillar, patronage, a system of rewards and transfers for loyal groups, is also running out. Promised bonuses for contract soldiers are being paid late, and the arms industry, instead of being the driving force of the economy, is itself beginning to struggle with crisis. When all three tools lose their power, the system becomes more fragile than ever before. Russians are therefore increasingly vocal about their desire for change. Just a few years ago, such words were unimaginable in public discourse, but now they are being uttered with increasing boldness. In private conversations, in local councils, in municipal petitions, this is where the language of opposition begins.
Разных возрастов. Конечно, более молодые, я думаю, ощущают...
Oczywiście młodsi, myślę, odczuwają to silniej, są przyzwyczajeni do internetu. Bez smartfona teraz nie ma życia. To nasze podstawowe narzędzie, tak? I tam robimy screeny, i oglądamy, i tam. Mamy prawo oglądać, co chcemy. Mamy prawo iść tam, gdzie nam wolno.
It is not immediately about revolution, but about a growing conviction that the current government is no longer able to ensure normality.
А мы стали по объему, по...
A my zostaliśmy pod względem wielkości gospodarki pierwsi w Europie. Wyprzedziliśmy RFN i zajęliśmy 5. miejsce na świecie.
и заняли 5-е место в мире.
People are not demanding abstract ideas. They want simple things. Fuel at gas stations, salaries and pensions on time, stable prices, a sense of security. When the state is unable to meet these basic expectations, even the most loyal citizens begin to doubt its purpose. This process will not be violent. It is more like a slow erosion, a slow decline. Every delay in the payment of benefits, every liter of gasoline bought with difficulty, every tax raised without real compensation, these are further cracks in the social contract. The Kremlin may still try to intimidate and make promises, but fewer and fewer people believe in those promises. Fear loses its power when everyday life becomes more painful than the potential punishment for dissent. That is why voices calling for a change in power are becoming louder. Not everyone says so directly because they know the consequences. But even half-words, jokes, or allusions are of great importance in a country where silence has reigned for years. Deputies in large cities are beginning to dare to voice criticism, and local councils are submitting petitions that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. People are beginning to see that they are not alone in feeling anger and powerlessness, and this sense of community is building the potential for resistance. There are no mass protests on the streets yet, because the apparatus of repression is still working efficiently. But beneath the surface, something is changing. In shops, at gas stations, in queues at government offices, and in the homes of pensioners, a conviction is growing that things cannot go on like this. The authorities are losing their most important tool, the conviction that they are the only guarantee of stability. When this myth disappears, there is room for thoughts of change. And this is a process that is difficult to stop. Russians do not have to take to the streets tomorrow to signal their mood. The very fact that they are beginning to talk about disappointment, betrayal, and the need for change is a breakthrough. Each successive crisis, whether it be fuel shortages, delayed pensions, or unwanted mobilization, only accelerates this process. The state, which was supposed to be a rock, is increasingly proving to be ineffective. And it is this inefficiency, not grand ideas, that is fueling the desire for change today. Let us know in the comments what you think. Will the Russians really wake up, and will this turn into a social uprising, or will the authorities in Moscow not allow themselves to lose support?